Σαν που είχα Χριστό όταν έρθει.
Ευλογητός ο Θεός ημών πάντοτε νύχια ή και στους αιώνας των αιώνων. Αμήν. Χριστός ανέστη, Αναστάσου ο Ιησούς από τους πάθηκαντες που είπε, έδωκεν ημίν την αιώνιον ζωή και μέγα έλεος. Αμήν.
Christ is risen. Welcome to Volos. Welcome to Volos Academy. We are very glad for this conference, which is organized in cooperation with the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Münster University and with the support of the Cluster of Excellence of the same university. My name is Pantelis Kalegitis, for the people who do not know me. I'm the director of Volos Academy for Theological Studies, and we will start this conference with a greeting I will address on behalf of the organizers. Your Eminence, dear Professor Hans-Peter Grosshans, dear colleagues, dear participants, on behalf of the Volos Academy for Theological Studies, it is my great privilege and honor to greet the International Conference titled Individual and Community in the Wake of the Public Discourse of the Church in Orthodox Theology, organized by the Volos Academy for Theological Studies and the Institute for Ecumenical Theology of the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Münster University, with the support of the Cluster of Excellence, Religion and Politics of the same university. We are indeed honored by the participation of all these eminent theologians and scholars from all over the world. We warmly welcome you to the city of Volos, the Diocese of Dimitrias, and the Volos Academy for Theological Studies, wishing you an enjoyable stay and fruitful exchanges and discussions during the consultation with all God's blessings. Volos Academy for Theological Studies, a church-related institution which in 2014 was recognized as research center by the Greek Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs, functions as an open forum of thought and dialogue between the Orthodox Church and the broader scholarly community of intellectuals worldwide. In its effort to foster interdisciplinary and interreligious understanding, the Volos Academy has been organizing a series of studies, international seminars, conferences, roundtables, and publications. In order to meet this objective, the Academy has collaborated with numerous academic, ecumenical, and interreligious institutions, religious and secular organizations, as well as with a number of journals, academic periodicals, and publication houses, jointly addressing problems and challenges of our time in a spirit of respect for each other's differences. As a result of this scholarly activity, the Diocese of Dimitrias and the city of Volos have become an international meeting place for encounter and dialogue. Volos Academy is internationally well known for its focus on a kind of modern agenda for Eastern Orthodoxy and its readiness to discuss in the light of the Orthodox tradition and the eschatological self-consciousness of the Church, the problems and challenges of today. Part of this agenda is the discussion of topics such as orthodoxy and modernity, ecclesiology and nationalism, issues of political theology, as well as figures and themes of 20th century Orthodox and Western theology. 3 years ago, in February 2020, we were glad to co-organize here in Volos, and again jointly with the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Münster University, an international conference on politics, society, and culture in Orthodox theology in a global age, the proceedings of which have been published as a book by Brill Schöning Publishing House, and which is accessible now for free in open access format. The present conference intends to continue the discussion initiated by the February 2020 meeting and to shed new light on the place of the individual in Orthodox tradition and theology, a key topic in order to approach and to understand not only the relation of Orthodoxy to modernity, but also to democracy, to human rights, and to the civil society. More particularly, the topics to be discussed will include the place of the individual in the writings and interpretation of the New Testament and patristics, the communal understanding of the Church and the theology of personhood, previous examples of subjectivity and individuality within the Orthodox tradition, the relationship of Catholicity and particularism, universal and local, primacy and synodality, case studies related to Orthodox countries, and more. This discussion will take place in an ecumenical perspective and will be enriched by relevant papers dealing with analogous topics from Lutheran and Roman Catholic traditions. In the present-day context, marked by the war and the Russian invasion to Ukraine, as well as by a belligerent anti-Western and nationalistic orthodoxy, the whole discussion could not remain to a pure theoretical level. Hence, a number of papers dealing either with the war, either with the Russian invasion, or with Orthodox fundamentalism. With these thoughts, I greet the present conference, wishing faithful and creative reflection, as well as a pleasant stay for our guests in the city of Volos, and with the hope that similar initiatives will multiply. Before I close this brief greeting, let me also take the opportunity to express my sincere thanks to all those who contributed to the preparation and realization of this conference. His Eminence Metropolitan Ignatius of Dimitrias for his continued support of the work of the Volos Academy. Professor Hans-Peter Grosshans, Director of the Institute of Ecumenical Theology at the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Münster University, for the excellent cooperation, his trust in the Volos Academy, and for the idea and the initiative to organize this series of conferences, securing the necessary resources from the Cluster of Excellence, Religion and Politics of his university. The staff, the research associates, and the volunteers of the Volos Academy for their tireless and continuous efforts for the best possible preparation of the conference. Also, the staff of the Thessaly Conference Center for their technical and other support. Last but not least, the session chairs and especially the conference speakers for accepting our invitation, taking the pace of traveling and offering new, crucially important material for reflection, as well as for fruitful and open dialogue. So welcome to Volos Academy, and to Diocese of Dimitrias, and I wish a very successful, with all God blessing conference. So thank you very much for your attention. Now I will invite to take the floor His Eminence Metropolitan Ignatius of Dimitrias, who will address the conference. He will speak in Greek, but you have, all of you, the English translation of his address in front of you.
Thank you very much. Αγαπητοί συνέδροι, με μεγάλη χαρά σας καλωσορίζω στο Διεθνές Συνέδριο με θέμα «Άτομο και κοινότητα» στην ανάπτυξη του δημοσίου λόγου της Ορθόδοξης Εκκλησίας. Το συνέδριο αυτό, το οποίο διοργανώνεται από την Ακαδημία Θεολογικών Σπουδών του Βόλου, σε συνεργασία με την Προτεσταντική Θεολογική Σχολή του Πανεπιστημίου του Μίνστερ στη Γερμανία και το πρόγραμμα Αριστείας, Θρησκεία και Πολιτική του ίδιου Πανεπιστημίου αποτελεί ουσιαστικά, όπως ελέγχθη, τη συνέχεια του συνεδρίου που έλαβε χώρα το Φεβρουάριο του 2020, πάλι εδώ στον Βόλο, στα όρια της τοπικής μας επισκοπής με θέμα πολιτική, κοινωνία και πολιτισμό στην Ορθόδοξη Θεολογία στην εποχή της παγκοσμιοποίησης. Τα τελευταία χρόνια έχει ανοίξει με επιτακτικό τρόπο η συζήτηση για τη θέση και το ρόλο της Ορθόδοξης Εκκλησίας στο δημόσιο χώρο. Ζώντας πλέον σε ένα σταδιακά, ακόμη και στις παραδοσιακά ορθόδοξες χώρες, πλουραλιστικό περιβάλλον, όπου η χριστιανική πρόταση για το νόημα της ιστορίας και της ζωής είναι μια από τις πολλές διαθέσιμες προτάσεις, η Εκκλησία μας και η θεολογία καλούνται να αναστοχαστούν γύρω από τις αλήθειες της πίστεως, επιχειρώντας έναν ειλικρινή, γόνιμο και χωρίς αγγυλώσεις διάλογο με τον σύγχρονο κόσμο. Ειδικά μάλιστα μετά από την ρωσική εισβολή στην Ουκρανία το Φεβρουάριο του 2022, φαίνεται να έχει ανοίξει ο ασκός του αιώλου, ώστε να υποστηρίζεται από πολλούς ότι η άποψη του γνωστού πολιτικού επιστήμονα Σάμιουελ Χάντιγκτον περί ασυμβατότητας της Ορθοδοξίας προς τη δημοκρατία και τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα και γενικότερα τις κατακτήσεις της νεωτερικότητας γίνεται πλέον πραγματικότητα, ειδικά στην περίπτωση της Ρωσικής Εκκλησίας, η οποία απροκάλυπτα στηρίζει το καθεστώς Πούτιν και υποστηρίζει τον επεκτατικό πόλεμο της Ρωσίας με άλοθη την ιδεολογία του ρωσικού κόσμου, όπως ονομάζεται. Εγκρατείς στοχαστές και ερευνητές από την Ελλάδα και το εξωτερικό καλούνται και καλείστε σε αυτό το συνέδριο υπό το φως των νέων προκλήσεων και εξελίξεων να επεκτείνεται τον προβληματισμό σε θέματα που άπτονται του πυρήνα του διαλόγου της Εκκλησίας με τον σύγχρονο κόσμο, τα οποία χρήζουν ισορροπημένης, νυφάλιας και βαθιάς ερμηνευτικής εργασίας, μακριά από αναχρονισμούς, αμυντικά αντανακλαστικά και διαρκή επίκληση του ένδοξου παρελθόντος. Θέματα όπως η θέση του ατόμου στην Ορθόδοξη παράδοση και θεολογία, η έννοια του προσώπου, μια κατεξοχήν ανατολική πρόταση και η σχέση του με την κοινότητα, ένα θέμα που αντιπαραθέτει διαχρονικά τη θεολογική σκέψη Ανατολής και Δύσης, αλλά και θέματα που αφορούν στη σχέση της Ορθοδοξίας με τις κατακτήσεις της φιλελεύθερης δημοκρατίας, όπως ο θρησκευτικός πλουραλισμός, θα αποτελέσουν αντικείμενο ενδελεχούς μελέτης στο πλαίσιο των εργασιών του συνεδρίου σας. Για άλλη μια φορά θα ήθελα και εγώ να σας ευχαριστήσω όλες και όλους για τη συμμετοχή σας σε αυτή την σημαντική συνάντηση και να ευχηθώ καλή επιτυχία στις εργασίες του συνεδρίου, που ξεκινάει σήμερα στην όμορφη πόλη μας, την πόλη του Βόλου, μια πόλη με παράδοση στον ανοιχτό διάλογο μεταξύ διαφορετικών θρησκευτικών, εθνικών και πολιτιστικών παραδόσεων, αλλά και στη φιλόξενη επισκοπή μας, η οποία στηρίζει, όπως ξέρετε, το έργο της Ακαδημίας Θεολογικών Σπουδών του Βόλου, ένα έργο ανοιχτών οριζόντων που αποσκοπεί στην καλλιέργεια του διαλογικού ήθους της Ορθοδοξίας. Και πάλι σας καλωσορίζω, εύχομαι να περάσετε όμορφα αυτές τις ημέρες και εύχομαι να υπάρχει συνέχεια της προσπάθειας και σε άλλο συνέδριο. Νομίζω ότι είναι η εποχή που πρέπει να διαλεγόμεθα, που πρέπει να αντιμετωπίζουμε την πραγματικότητα με διάλογο, σύνεση και συνεργασία. Καλή επιτυχία.
Thank you, Your Eminence. And I will now invite Professor Hans-Peter Grossans, the director of the Institute for Ecumenical Studies at the Faculty of Protestant Theology of Münster University, to address the conference. I would like, before I give him the floor, I would like to say how grateful we are to his initiative to propose and to find the resources for organizing this series of conferences. So, Hans-Peter, the floor is yours.
The best thing is that you cooperate with me. Thank you. So, Eminence Ignatius, Antelis Kalatzidis, dear colleagues, dear guests, I also welcome you now as one of the co-organizer, and thank you all that you are here. My name is Hans-Peter Grossans. I come from Germany, Münster, in the northwest of Germany, and I'm the professor at the Faculty of Protestant Theology. I'm since a long time concerned with Orthodox theology, beginning with studies on Orthodox ecclesiology, and then being part of the ecumenical dialogue between the Protestant churches in Germany and the ecumenical patriarchate in Constantinople. And what I'm interested is here related to our topic, how the Orthodox theology and the churches are reacting to major changes in society, culture and politics, and how they are, say, what the resonance this causes in doctrine and practice. This is a question for me beyond the Orthodox churches. I'm interested in these processes, but especially coming from these dialogues, I was interested when I met Pantelis, we talked about this, to look on this question now, especially in relation to, say, Orthodox theology and the modern world, what is generally called the modern world, how this has, say, some effects or has some resonances in Orthodox theology. So this is the more or less abstract, systematic question, which I'm interested in mainly. And we started this 3 years ago, as Pantelis Kalaitsidis already said, was a conference where we looked on this issue more in a, say, wider perspective. And now we want to, with you, to look on this in the relation of individual and community, be it the community, say the church, to the church, be it to the individual person outside or somewhere in humanity in general, or be it as members of the church. So my short greeting is also short. So I only want to thank now, especially Pantelis Kalaitsidis, but also all the people who contributed to the organizing of this conference and now also to the running. Especially I like to thank Kostis Trigianakis. Sorry for... But I want to thank you especially, because I know that you are the working machine. I also thank you very much, Eminence, that you are accompanying this conference with your blessings and also with your support, especially your spiritual support, which is very valuable to us. And I like also to thank all who contribute to this conference with their papers and who accepted the invitation to come. So it's wonderful that you are here. Thank you very much. And now we go on.
Thank you, Hans-Peter, for your address and for your kind words. Let me show you the book, the volume, which is the fruit of the previous conference, the conference we organized here in February 2020, just before the pandemic. Politics, Society, and Culture in Orthodox Theology in a Global Age. I have the honor and the privilege to serve as co-editor along with Hans-Peter Grosshans for this volume, which is published by Brill Schoening. And the most important, it is free. It is with free access. It is open access format, so you can go to the Brill publications and download all the papers of this very important volume. Now it is time for our keynote speaker, according to our program, according to our schedule. The keynote lecture will be given by Professor Jose Casanova, a well-known political scientist, sociologist of religion, theologian, and thinker and intellectual. Let me first read very quickly his bio, his CV. Professor Dr. Jose Casanova is a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and emeritus professor of sociology and theology and religious studies at Georgetown University. From 1987 to 2007, he served as professor of sociology at the New School for Social Research in New York. His book, Public Religions in the Modern World, published in Chicago in 1994, has become a modern classic and has been translated into many European and non-European languages. Among his recent publications are Global Religious and Secular Dynamics, Brill 2019, and two collections of essays in Ukrainian languages, published in 2017 and 2019. He's also the co-editor of the Jesuits and Globalization, published by Georgetown University Press in 2016, Islam, Gender and Democracy in Comparative Perspective, published in Oxford in 2017, and Asian Catholicism and Globalization, published, that will be published, it is forthcoming by Georgetown University Press. Professor Casanova holds a BA in philosophy from the Seminario Metropolitano in Zaragoza, Spain, a master's degree in theology from Universitat Innsbruck in Austria, and a master's degree, a PhD in sociology from the New School for Social Research. He's the recipient of the 2012 Theologischer Preis der Salzburger Hochschule in recognition of his lifelong achievement in the field of theology. Usually, keynote lectures are not followed by question, but I asked Jose if he likes to have a brief discussion after his keynote lecture, and he absolutely agreed because he likes very much to have discussion and exchange. So I will invite Professor Jose Casanova for the keynote lecture, and which will be followed by discussion. So please applaud our keynote speaker.
Everybody. Thank you so much, Professor Kalaitsidis and Professor Grosshan, for the kind invitation. It's a great honor for me to have been invited to present some of my ideas. It's not going to be a formal lecture because the theme is too broad, and I want to send a kind of provocative ideas. My presentation is going to have three parts.
Sorry, before this, because I apologize, I forgot the topic of the presentation, which is Christian communitarian individualism.
Right. So the first part of my presentation is going to trace the Christian sources of modern individualism. In the second part, I'm going to elaborate some of the tensions between between Christian communitarian individualism and modern secular autonomous individualism. And in the third part, I'm going to discuss Ukraine as an Orthodox, deeply religious Orthodox society that actually represents the modern values of individualism and community, and that precisely is an evidence of an Orthodox society with a very rich and strong democratic civil society. So let me begin first with the Christian sources of modern individualism. Obviously, this is a topic that has been discussed so many times, and I cannot offer new ideas. Only begin by saying that it's obvious that the core of abstract individualism, which is also one of the characteristics of modern individualism, is, of course, the kind of abstract individualism which is obviously in the Pauline expression that in the eschatological Church of Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, free man or slave, male or female. The church offers salvation to individuals qua individuals, not members of ethnic groups, Jews or Gentiles. not members of any social class, freeman or slave, and not members of one gender, male or female. So again, it is an individualism which transcends any kind of ethnic, national, class, race, or gender difference. The question, of course, is how could this idea, because we know, of course, that the Christian churches, did not necessarily then serve to transform these abstract ideas into empirical, institutionalized forms in the world. In the famous saying of Hannah Arendt, when she was reacting to the argument that modern democracy has Christian origins, and her question, I think is a very valid question, is then why did it take it 1800 years for these Christian values to become historical reality? So again, I'm not going to give a history of how this happened. We have good, let's begin with two crucial sources, very good, not simple, very complex, that explain or at least elaborate on this one, both by Charles Taylor, the sources of the self, the modern individual, and the sources, it begins with basically the Augustine and the Christian tradition, certainly the Western Christian tradition, and then goes through the whole history of philosophy and how it has become part of our taken for granted notion of which kind of individuals we are. And the second, of course, a secular age, which of course is also analyzed as the outcome of a long process of, if you wish, tension between Christian attempts to Christianize the seculum society, to make individuals in the seculum Christian, to follow these Christian principles, reactions against it. And out of these very dynamics, he argues, we have our own secular age. But it's a form of secularized Christianity, no doubt about it. So let me simply point at least to a few episodes. I'm going to quote a passage from Nicholas Cusanus, from the Docta Ignorantia, written in 1440, or published in 1440. There is but one indivisible humanity and a specific essence of all men, by which all individual men are men numerically distinct, each one from each. The same humanity is that of Christ and of all men. Hence, it is clear that the humanity of all men, who in the temporal order came before or after Christ, has in Christ put on immortality. This was written in the middle of the 15th century on the eve of what we will call today the birth of Christian Renaissance humanism, and also on the eve of what will be the Western colonial expansion, beginning with the Iberian expansion into the Americas and into the Indies, both the West Indies and the East Indies, which of course had to come to terms with the reality of a humanity that was much more complex and much more different than what European Christians had imagined. But out of this encounter, of course, which is also tied with the great crimes, genocidal crimes of European conquest and repression of other people, and I come from Spain and I understand what the conquest of America meant in terms of for the native people, but yet in this very same context of exploitation and slavery, enslavement, then you also have the response of friars like Bartolomé de las Casas and the School of Salamanca, the Dominican School of Salamanca, scholastic, that basically comes up with the Jus Gentium, which is the foundation of our both doctrine of universal human rights and the beginning of international law of peoples and of nations. So this is one aspect of already preparation, but this I would argue with the very definition of our modern individual values, both in the American Declaration of Independence and in the Declaration of the Rights of Man by the National Assembly, that again, those ideas are very clear. As you know, the American Declaration of Independence begins with the words, "We take these truths for self-evident." Of course, they were far from being empirically evident. On the contrary, they were totally not evident. They were transcendent norms that were self-evident as transcendent norms, but not as reality. That all men, and of course we will say all men and women, we will say today, are created equal, not born, created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, including, of course, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, here you have one trinity, basically liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. I would argue that those are three norms that somehow, at least that's what Taylor has argued, are very much linked to the Christian tradition. And then comes the trinity in the French Revolution, which actually is liberty, equality, and fraternity. A little more Christian in principle than the Anglo-Saxon, more, you could say, egoist pursuit of happiness or individualist pursuit of happiness. Now, of course, we know that when those truths were proclaimed, the Christian churches didn't immediately accept them as being Christian values. It took a while for the Christian church to affirm them as Christian values. And I could argue, of course, and we are here to discuss this, partly, that part of the contemporary debate and rethinking within the Orthodox tradition is to come to terms in the form of, if you wish, aggiornamento. I myself, I'm Roman Catholic, who studied theology right after the Vatican II, and I'm, in this respect, a son of the Catholic aggiornamento. But then I went to sociology, so I'm not a theologian myself, so I'm not going to try to develop theological arguments. I'm presenting what are sociological arguments that are defensible, whether you are Christian or not, as defensible arguments. I cannot claim any expertise in Orthodox theology. I'm learning. I was very glad to be part of the IOTA conference, where I learned a lot, and I'm very glad to be here and to be part of the conversations in the next days. My relation to the Orthodox tradition, or at least to the Byzantine tradition, to the Eastern tradition, comes from I'm married into the Greek Catholic Church, and so I have somewhat. I'm a Ukrainian by choice, if not by birth. I speak Ukrainian with my son at home. Let me then go on. It was in the United States where this fusion, you could argue, of Christian and secular individualism was most evident, certainly to Tocqueville. When Tocqueville visited America and wrote Democracy in the United States of America, basically, he was the first one to coin the term individualism. Individualism was first used by Tocqueville, he says, to define a novel condition that comes with democratic society, and that he only found in the United States, nowhere in Europe. So he found something different, and he called it individualism. Now he realized that this individualism, of course, can be rather asocial and communitarian if it is not linked to something that transcends the individual self. So to transcend what he calls solipsistic individualism, that's where religion comes in the United States. And it is religious associations, Tocqueville says, which are the core, the fountain, and the source of American civil society. Of all voluntary associations in the United States have their origin in the voluntary religious associations, because Christianity in America was established by Christian sects, not by Christian churches. And it was the sectarian Christianity that developed this radical principle of individuality and religious organizations, which are not controlled neither by the church nor by the state. Again, when I talk of Christianity, I use it in very general terms that includes Eastern Christianities, Roman Christianities, and Protestant Christianities of all types. So, let's say the three sources of individualism, or the three fundamental principles would be autonomy, you could say, the defense of what Taylor calls ordinary life, not the heroic life of aristocrats, but ordinary life of ordinary people, and for equal for all. And of course, the third, the pursuit of happiness, or at least the right of individuals to search, to find themselves, to develop their potential, and to somehow self-develop in their particular direction up to their potential. One could, again, I think following Taylor, argue that all these three principles have a base in Christianity. If the quote I gave from Apostle Paul points to the abstract egalitarian individualism, the second, of course, source is personhood, or the personalist theology of the individual. Again, as you know, persona originally, and here I would recommend that you the category of the person by Marcel Mauss, the great French anthropologist and sociologist. Persona in Latin, before it became a Christian category, a theological category, simply meant the mask that actors wear in the theater to resonate. They are both personare, so that it resonates. So the mask that resonates in the theater is what actually the name of persona. But then this concept that has no religious meaning was caught up with the great theological debates about the Trinitarian personhood. It is out of the theological debates of Trinitarian personhood that our concept of the person comes. A concept that had no religious meaning, persona, becomes then the core of our idea of the uniqueness of each person. It's not only that abstract individualism, so there is absolute equality, but that each individual then is unique and different from the other, all created in the image of God, and yet each different from the other, and equally worthy of respect. Those debates, of course, went on throughout the 19th century in Western societies. Perhaps the most interesting debate, again, I'm presenting as a sociologist, by one of the founding fathers of sociology, the sociologist Emil Durkheim, where he has the classic essay on the two individualisms. In the midst of a terrible polarization in the French Democratic Republic, leading very close to a civil war, not unlike the kind of polarization we have in contemporary Western democratic societies, and where people, it was in the midst of the Dreyfus affair, you know, of this officer, a Jewish origin, that was accused of being a traitor and a spy for the German army. As you know, France and Germany had been at war or preparing for war for several decades. And Dreyfus was accused of being a German spy. And it's cut French society apart. And again, the traditionalists were accusing modern individualism of all the decadence of modern society. And against this accusation, Durkheim came up with this idea. The modern individualism we represent is a transcendent value. It's not linked to egoistic individualism. This individualism is not the individualism of the person that is superior because of higher knowledge, more courage, a more higher birth. This is the whole idea of the Aristoi, that Nietzsche, for Nietzsche, is the real individualism. And of course, Nietzsche reacts against the kind of ordinary individualism that is equally respectful of each human being, and argues this is, Durkheim says, the religion of modernity. The cult of the individual is the secular religion of modernity. We have no other, he says. But this is not the cult of each individual per individual, but only insofar as we share the same humanity. it is not what distinguishes each of us from the other, but what we share as humans and the sacred dignity that we have as humans, not because who we are and which kind of abilities, capabilities we have. And that is where you have, once you have it in those terms, you have the restraints, the limits to the principle of autonomy, that individualism begins with autonomy, and only autonomous individuals are, if you wish, fully human. Then, of course, half of our lives we are not fully human, because half of our lives we are not autonomous. We are mammals, and we need a lot of time to develop into full humans. But as we know, the sacred dignity of the human person is also in each child and in the most weak and incapacitated person. So again, autonomy is understood as the kind of self, kind of almost exertion of oneself independent from the others and without need of the others, of course, is a false proposition, at least empirically. As a sociologist, I can say it may be an interesting norm, but sociologically, you have to say it's a very false norm, because no society can be organized on such a principle. The second, an ordinary life. Again, the affirmation of ordinary life, of the fact that we are going to celebrate life in the seculum, and it is here in the seculum where we can find sanctification, a central principle of the Protestant Reformation, that we don't need this extraordinary kind of sainthood of the evangelical virtues of abandoning the world and the vows of charity, obedience, and chastity to be saints, but that each individual has to find its vocation in the world, in the life, in the world, in the family, and so on. So again, this is a fundamental principle of our modern organization of society that has also its Christian origins in the Protestant Reformation. But again, when this principle is made into what, again, Taylor calls self-exclusive humanism, that argues a purely immanent humanism without need for any transcendence, then of course it again limits the possibility of what Taylor calls beyond human flourishing. The fact that, and this is what the Christian tradition says, we are supposed to flourish in this world, but we are supposed to transcend this into a higher form of life. And then the pursuit of happiness, if it's understood as an egoist pursuit at the expense of others, which is partly the problem with modern, especially utilitarian egoism, then of course it's problematic. That's why I argue that, as opposed to this principle, Christian individualism insists on the communitarian component, that we are relational persons, that we can only really become ourselves in relation to others and thanks to these relationships. Otherwise, you can never become autonomous. And so to gain autonomy, you need relational relations with your neighbors, with others, with other humans, and you could say, ultimately, with God. And it is this secularist notion that human autonomy is incompatible with theonomy, with the notion that somehow God is not an impediment to human autonomy, but is the very condition of possibility to full autonomy. I'm not going to get into these debates here. I'm simply proposing them as theses that distinguish, if you wish, Christian individualism and secular autonomous individualism. Let me now actually go to Ukraine. As you know, tragically, we are experiencing a war between the two largest Orthodox societies in the world. We must think of Ukraine as an Orthodox society, not part of Russia, but a truly authentic Orthodox society. And that precisely what it is at stake is the right of an Orthodox society to have its own Orthodox church and to be part of Europe, precisely defending what are called European values. It was yesterday that Ursula von Leyen, the European Commission President, said that Ukraine can be viewed today as the beating heart of today's European values. And this was what the Euromaidan was. At a time when the European Union was in serious crisis and people didn't want to talk anymore about European values, in Ukraine, people rise up for those values. You can say, what makes Ukraine different from Russia or from Belarus? Those were three societies very similar, post-Soviet societies. I've been as a sociologist studying Ukraine now for 30-somewhat years. And the transformation of experience is nothing short of miraculous. In 1994, Lukashenko was elected president of Belarus, and Kuchma was elected president in Ukraine. And Putin came 2 years later as president of Russia. Lukashenko and Putin made sure that they stay as president forever, for life. When Kuchma tried to do the same, was re-elected for a second time, when he tried to change the constitution, again to be re-elected for a third time, for the first time, Ukrainian civil society rose, and you had the first uprising, the first mobilization of civil society for democracy. So Kuchma did not succeed. And Ukraine thereafter has had regularly presidential elections, relatively free. And when presidents have tried again and again to corrupt these elections, when Yanukovych tried to do it in 2004, you had the Orange Revolution. When Yanukovych tried again to go against what had been very clearly the express will of the Ukrainian people, expressed in the representative of Ukrainian parliament, of joining the European Union, and when Yanukovych made a deal with Putin to renegade on this, then again you had the beginning of Euromaidan. And it is, for Putin, Euromaidan is simply a putsch of the CIA. Believe me, as a sociologist, I can tell you, no secret security agency can mobilize hundreds of thousands of people for months in the cold of winter, and then organizing really a self-organized civil society, helping each other brotherly. Let me talk of what is the miraculous thing of Ukraine. Ukraine is today the most religiously pluralistic society of Europe. The only society of Europe that has broken with the model of a national church and religious minorities and follows the American model of equal denominations. Partly for the same reasons that in America, none of the three churches at the time of independence could become the national church, then the minorities could flourish under those conditions, and then you have no distinction between church and sect, and all of them become denominations. And this has happened in Ukraine. Precisely because Orthodoxy was divided, at the time, 3 churches, and then the Greek Catholics. So you had actually 4 churches claiming to be the heir of Kievan Rus. You may see from the point of view of our belief in the eschatological unity of the church, this may be a problem. From the perspective of learning, toleration, dialogue, and respect for each other, this is a blessing. Ukraine has AUKRO, which is the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, which encompasses or brings together all the Orthodox churches and the Armenian Orthodox Church and the Greek Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Church and 6 Protestant churches and 2 Islamic communities and the Jews, 15 of them. The presidency of this association, which is self-organized from within, is not the government organizes it, unlike the pluralism in Russia, which is, of course, organized by the central government and decides that the Russian Orthodox Church is the hegemonic church, the national church of the Slavic people, and then you have the historic religions of Russia, the Buddhists and the Muslims and the Jews. And then you have the others which are not, which are foreign religions, therefore should not be tolerated. Ukraine, there is no distinction between all those religious organizations. They rotate the presidency. Last year, AUCRO celebrated its 25th anniversary. And the slogan of AUCRO is, we are all different, but we are all equal. And it is, what I say, the miracle that our society probably has suffered, I would argue again, more than any other society in the catastrophic genocides of the 20th century. World War I was basically fought on Ukrainian soil in the East. The Bolshevik Revolution, all the wars were fought on Ukrainian soil. Then you have the Holodomor, the Great Famine Genocide, the complete elimination of the Ukrainian intelligentsia, of the Communist Party, and basically of all the, and then of course of the kulaks of the peasantry. Then you have, of course, World War II that again was fought mainly in Ukraine. Russia tells about Ukraine, and sometimes Germans say how they feel guilty about Russia, but never about Ukraine, when in fact, there were more victims of World War II in Ukraine, proportionally, and one could say even absolutely, than in Russia. And yet that out of these tragedies, a tolerant, open society could emerge. I would say it's quasi miraculous. One of the reasons I argue is because all the people that were repressed by the Soviets, including the Ukrainian Orthodox and the Greek Catholics and the Jews and the Protestants, all of them were together in the Gulag. And they learned to respect each other in the Gulag as victims of Soviet rule. And so when democracy came, they could also accept a multi-religious society. The same goes for multi-ethnicity. It's a political nation made up of ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians and ethnic Tatars and ethnic Armenians. And it's a multilingual society. Russian, Ukrainian is bilingually spoken by everybody. Until now, at least, it was spoken. Now, of course, people have enough, and even those who spoke regularly Russian have decided that they don't want to speak Russian anymore. But this is a cause because of the war, not because Ukrainians were before Russophobes or were against Russian culture. So the point I'm trying to make when we are talking of civil society is and human rights. There is an Orthodox society today which is sacrificing itself to defend those values for this society and to assess them for the rest of Europe. And I want to ask the Orthodox world to pay more attention to Ukrainian Orthodoxy. They don't have great theologians. They didn't have intellectual institutions. Everything was taken by the Russians. But Ukraine was an Orthodox society that in the 16th, 17th century was part of the Polish Commonwealth, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and because of it was in communication with the Protestant reformers, the Catholic counter-reformists, and had its own Orthodox reformation. It's the only Orthodox society that went through the process of an Orthodox reformation in the 17th century. It's the Kyiv Mohyla Academy, it's the humanist colleges that were established in Kiev. They were modeled after the Jesuit colleges and after the Lutheran gymnasiums. And of course, it was a movement led by, because the aristocracy very frequently became either Polish or Russian, by the people from below. It has always been a church from below, from the people. Never had a symphonia between church and state. It was always a church from below, a church of the people. Very much, I would argue, even a you could argue, liberation theology, because it was anti-imperial, anti-monarchist. When the Orthodox Church emerged in the midst of the Bolshevik Revolution, they wanted to have their own church, their own language, vernacular Ukrainian church. But Russia has denied again and again for 100 years. Every time the Ukrainians have asked for autocephaly, Russia has said, no, it's stupid. Had the Russians given the Ukrainians autocephaly in 91, when they asked for, today there will be a large Ukrainian Orthodox Church, autocephalos, under the Moscow Patriarchate. But they refused to do it. They refused to do it. Again, as you know, probably if you don't know, they wanted to have their own bishops, but no Russian bishop would consecrate any of the Ukrainian priests as bishop. So they had to consecrate their own. And in this respect was born as an uncanonical church. And it had always the stigma of being an uncanonical church. They had been uncanonical, but it was a true Christian church. And this was repeated again in World War II and was repeated again after independence. Again, we must understand that when the Soviets took over, I mean, eventually the Soviets, of course, supported this Ukrainian church against the monarchist imperial Russian Orthodox Church. Later, of course, they eliminated this church as well. But when after World War II, when Western Ukraine was annexed to the Soviet Union, both churches, the Ukrainian Autokephalos Orthodox Church, that was part of Poland, particularly in Volyn, and the Greek Catholic Church, both were eliminated completely. So the only church in Soviet Ukraine was the Russian Orthodox Church. People that were Greek Catholics were forced to become Orthodox. And people that were Orthodox Ukrainians were forced to become Russian Orthodox by force. If not, they went to the Gulag. And so when the chance emerged for these people to have their own churches, they want to have their churches back. For people, so it is a question of conflict. Well, conflict because somebody has a monopoly, and now they say we are the victims and we are the victimizers, that we truly participated in the violent elimination of these two Christian churches. Not yet. The Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate has not yet given any sign of, at least perhaps this was not the best thing to do, to eliminate our Christian brothers and sisters. And today they still think that they are the only canonical church that has the right to be. They have a monopoly over Ukraine. And neither Greek Catholics, nor Orthodox Ukrainians, nor Protestants should have a right for their church in Ukraine. If they could have the Soviets again helping them, or Russians again, they would do it again. They've done it in the East, in Donbass, in Crimea. The moment they occupy, again, they basically persecuted Greek Catholic priests, Ukrainian Orthodox priests, Protestants, Tatars, Muslims, and we know that they would have done it if they would have been successful in the occupation. So the question is, we actually have two models of orthodoxy fighting with one another in this war. We know that this is a war within orthodoxy, global orthodoxy. We know it's a fundamental conflict between the ecumenical patriarch and the Moscow Patriarchate over supremacy. We know that it goes back to the failure of the Council of Crete, and it's crucial that global orthodoxy becomes aware and takes positions on this fundamental conflict within global orthodoxy. Because much of the issues we've discussed, having to do with the relation of orthodoxy and modernity and democracy and human rights and individual values, this is what is at stake. So with this, I'll finish my presentation.
Thank you, dear Jose Casanova, for this insightful and provocative presentation, which I think gives the opportunity to open up a discussion with questions and remarks. So please, who wants to speak? Professor Hans-Peter Grosshans. Just a moment, please, the micro.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this inspiring reflections. To the last point, I do not want to say much, only the one point that from my observation, some people have been attacking this ethnophilitism, which is lived out by some parts of the Orthodox world. And also our last conference had in the book some papers who are addressing this in respect to various Orthodox churches, so not only to the Russian. I like to make a remark on this, your reflection on autonomy. So really, I'm unsure where this, when this term autonomy became so popular. And if I think in my historical memory, I'm always coming to my mind Immanuel Kant to this issue, and a famous essay of him, What is Enlightenment? And here it's saying the situation is this: enlightenment is the, say, going out from the self-imposed immaturity.
Very out there.
So in a kind of bondage and not taking really the possibilities which are in my nature, more or less. But it's not autonomy. So I rather wonder if we should not change terminology in describing the individualistic person and not talk about self-responsibility, for example, because this is in the end the point with autonomy. To be self-responsible, to say, which means I can answer the questions which I am asked.
I think that the Christian origin is moral autonomy. The insistence of the Christian tradition that each individual is morally autonomous, and because that's precisely responsible. There can be no self-responsibility for one's own fate unless you are morally autonomous. So it is moral autonomy which is then the base for, but again, this is I would argue, a transcendental norm. What we do with it, in reality, is an empirical reality. Sociologically, sociology was actually born as a discipline to challenge mother individualism, the theories that society comes of the contracts of individuals, especially Durkheim against Spencer and Spencerian individualism. So this is the core, and the notion that somehow individuals come together already as fully autonomous and then organize society. So in this respect, yes, this is one of the fundamental, sociologically at least. But I understand that the core of this autonomy is the principle of moral autonomy. Sometimes sociologists go too far, and in the extent that because people are so dependent on social circumstances, they lose their autonomy. And the argument always that Christianity has made, we are, even when we are less free, we are still morally autonomous. In prison, we could be the most free. Enslaved people could be autonomous, morally autonomous. So this is the fundamental, I guess, argument, the base, the core of individual autonomy. But when it's translated into a self-made man, right? And that I give the laws to myself, because the principle of autonomy, law, we give the autonomy, legal autonomy is precisely that we give the laws, and that's because we accept them in the Kantian sense. I think there is a fundamental problem in this abstract moral individualism.
Before I will ask Asad Katan to ask his question, I would like to continue a little bit about what Hans-Peter Gross has said about autonomy. I think one critique addressed to all Christian traditions regarding autonomy is that Christians and all religious systems cannot claim about autonomy because they are very much related to a kind of heteronomy, because believing in God and receiving moral theonomy. So how to answer this question? How to answer this critique? Could we really claim, could we really speak about autonomy when we come to Christianity?
Well, I mean, my answer would be sociologically, we know that a lot of people gain their own self-autonomy precisely in relation with God. So the close relationship with God, personal relation, rather than curtailing their freedom, made them free to act. And we know this in history from individual religious persons that were basically went against the current, from especially women, right? Women religious, that had the courage to do things that their society would not allow them to do, but because God allowed them to do it. So you have, I mean, sociologically, you can argue that there's so much evidence that actually this personal relationship with God when it's true, authentic, then it's not necessarily a curtailment of autonomy. It is precisely the blunt argument that somehow if you are secular, then you are free, but if you are religious or somehow, I think this is empirically nonsense. There are religious people which are not autonomous and have no close personal relation with God. They just follow whatever tradition is. And then there are, of course, a lot of secular persons that are not autonomous at all, but just follow whatever fashion or whatever the media tell them to do. So in this respect, the argument that somehow the same argue about secular reason being more rational than religious argument. Again, I never accepted Habermas' presupposition that somehow secular means rational. A lot of secular arguments we know. I mean, today our secular democracies are in trouble in terms of their rationality. The more secular they are, the more in trouble they are. So I mean, I don't buy this argument. So and empirically, I see no reason. Of course, there are a lot of religious people, and historically there has been a lot of heteronomy, but not heteronomy because of God, but because of patriarchal, both male clericalism, all kinds of the power, institutional power of churches, not necessarily because of theology.
Thank you for this answer. So, Asad Katan, please.
Is it functioning?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking speech. And in spite of the fact that I was very much fascinated by the last part pertaining to Ukraine, you just telling us that, well, not only the future of Europe, but also the future of Orthodoxy is dependent on the battle waged in Ukraine. I think this is very provocative and thought-provoking for us as people participating in this conference. But in spite of this, I would ask two questions pertaining to the first part of your speech, the issue of autonomy, because you just said that when it comes to autonomy, you are speaking especially on, or it is based mostly on moral responsibility, that individuals are morally responsible. So it goes beyond Protestantism. It goes beyond, because moral responsibility, this is found in
all Christian traditions.
Yeah, and in patristic tradition as well. But it's also found in Islam, moral responsibility. It's found in the Quran. So do you think that on this very issue we can speak of something which goes beyond Christianity, which is found also in other religions, and to what extent? Because it seems to me that later on in Islamic theology, there existed, or there happened something like, well, an endeavor to minimize this moral responsibility in the name of, God's freedom generates that the human beings are less free. This is my first question. And the second question is related to the issue of dignity. Well, you said human dignity. It is actually, it presupposes transcendence. It presupposes God as a transcendent being, guaranteeing this transcendence. But it seems to me that this is the main issue today. Do you think that we can think human dignity without presupposing God as a transcendent existence? Is it possible? How to dialogue on this with, secular French people who do not believe in God, but they believe in human dignity as a humanistic value? Thank you very much.
Yes, let me first address the second question. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I have no question about it, that secular humanists may have as much respect for the sacred dignity of the human person, and are morally feel responsibility to have also universal fraternity, and that this is not only for themselves. So I'm only free when all humans are free, and not only there is the element also of the prophetic preferential option for the poor, the widow, the child, the orphan. It's the preferential option for the poor, because precisely against the pure utilitarianism, the maxim, the greatest happiness to the greatest numbers. No, we can only be happy when even the most unhappy people are made happy, when the victims are made full, so it is precisely the argument that it is the people that have the least that deserve the most in terms of solidarity. So it is this notion, and you have a lot of secular humanists that also do it. So if it is not only based on utilitarian principles, but it's based on this, if you wish, moral obligation towards the other, it's a form of what Taylor calls secularized agape. It's basically what our modern solidarity basically is based on. Then yes, indeed, I have no question that, and again, I would not. You have a lot of religious people which are not, I would argue, very charitable towards others, and you have a lot of secular people that are. So for me, again, it's in the fruits that you will know, and so I have no difficulty in finding. So I'm not arguing for the need for a truly rational argument based on ultimately this transcendence, a transcendent norm, whether you can base it on faith because you believe in revelation, because you believe in Jesus Christ and the humanity that you share, or you believe in something else. So I'm not arguing about the basis for it. So I'm not looking for a rational base for transcendence in secular humanism, but I have no doubt that there are a lot of secular humanists that feel a transcendent obligation to act in such a manner. So empirically, I have no problem with it. And also because I don't expect that the agreement will be on the transcendental basis of our argument. Part of the problem, this is again on the consensus. Let's accept that we share the norms, whether those norms come from theonomy or from secular humanism. Let's bracket it out. Let's simply share the norms and let's collaborate in acting on those norms. And the first question again is exactly the same. Islam is simply a biblical tradition, comes from the same monotheist traditions. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the same God of Christianity and of the Jews. So there is no question about it. That basically they have the same basis for it. So, but I will go beyond. This was the argument of Jaspers, Karl Jaspers with the axial age. They need to go beyond Athens and Jerusalem. Because in the West, we have thought that, yes, we accept that somehow our Western civilization comes from somehow the tension, the fusion of the religious sources, Jerusalem and Athens. And he went beyond and said, no, let's look for moral universalism, that also around the same time, basically, those people are around the same age. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Isaiah, and so on, and Confucius and Buddha. Those are global contemporaries. And they are all the basis for these universalist moral civilizations, based on moral universalism. The Confucian ethic is not an ethic for the Chinese, an ethic for humans. They call it the human ethic, not for Chinese, for humans. And Socrates, of course, doesn't speak to the Greeks, speaks to humans. And of course, the message of salvation of the Bible is for humans, not for Jews only, and so on and so on. And the same goes for Buddha. Those are universalistic moral discourses. And so in this respect, I have no doubt that there are the foundations. I mean, part of the mystery, of course, for Christians is if you think that the actuality of history comes with the incarnation, then how do you accept the fact that so many people before and after may never have heard of Christ? And how then, well, the Trinitarian theology allows you to say that the spirit of creation was somehow also working in all these other civilizations throughout history, not only through Jesus Christ, but the Trinity goes beyond, in this respect, Christocentric. I'm probably entering now in theological difficult waters, but at least I see that in our global age, this is the only way we can think really in a way that we can then enter into real dialogue with the other traditions.
Okay, Father Vasilios Thermos, there, please.
Thank you. I would like to say that I did like your interpretation of Galatians 3:28, in the meaning that those who are to be saved will not be saved by belonging to a certain group. And it comes to my mind that there are at least two aspects of autonomy. One is autonomy from God, and we know that theoreticians of ethics speak about that, and so we Christians and all religious people are considered heteronomous. But there is also an autonomy from society, from the group where we belong. And in this perspective, I'm thinking of the conversions to Christianity during the first centuries. I mean, throughout all centuries, but it's impressive at that time. We know that some young martyrs, especially women, were killed not because they denounced the religion of the family, but because they just dared to exit their community or to exit their kinship, their relatives, their family, their very family. Sometimes the father was offended because of their decision. So with the church that is built every day and is growing bigger because of conversions, I guess there is an implied sociology there by the church, that people can define their own route. They can design their own, they can dispose themselves freely. And it's impressive that 20 centuries after that, there are parts of Christianity, or even in other religions, I don't know, in which this principle cannot be applied. And someone who converts, who exits this community, is considered to be a traitor. And sometimes it's not the ecclesiastical community, it's just the ethnic ideology. Someone who abolishes the Ruski Mir ideology is being considered a traitor now, 20 centuries later. So in a way, there are some societies of the past, of the far past, that function with more respect to the person and their autonomy than some communities of today. Right. And I would like also to a comment from you that, do you call technically society every large group, or there are some qualitative criteria for that?
Right, I mean,
yeah.
To the final question, obviously, societas, it's interesting that the name of practically every scientific discipline is a Greek name. Only sociology, there was no word in Greek for sociology, society, so it was called sociology. Not so you have the mixture of this Latin word and this Greek word.
But communism stole it.
Well, my point is societas Jesu, right? So this was a form of association. So you have both. Any association is a societas in this respect, right? But then you have the conception of the modern Gesellschaft, the civil society in the Hegelian sense of, family, right? So you have the oikos and the polis. What modernity adds is to the oikos, to kinship, and to the polis, the state, you add in between bourgeois civil society, whatever you want to call it. So this is what defines modernity. In this respect, sociology can only be born as a discipline when this phenomenon that did not exist before, something separate, independent, autonomous from both oikos and polis, which emerges. And so this is what our modern, I mean, it's very clear in Hegel's, and then Marx takes it from Hegel, and basically all theories of civil society and sociology comes out of this tradition. But back to your main question, of course, this is what these universalistic religions are. They are basically offer universal fraternization. People that can leave their ethnic group, their kinship, their family, and to become brothers and sisters of a larger transcending societies. So you could argue, I mean, for me, sociology is very clear. There are two main theories of sociology of religion, the Durkheimian one that emphasizes the role of religion in integrating societies, in maintaining solidarity, cohesion. And then you have the Max Weber one of the prophetic, precisely, role of religion to transcend existing societies and create new process of fraternization, larger structures. And again, I mean, in the contemporary global age, you see very clearly a revival of missionary, I mean, the Greek church in the 60s became a missionary church in Africa. And today, the big battles between Moscow and Constantinople are fought in Africa, right? Over these communities. And of course, the 60s is the time when the Catholic Church really becomes aware of its global identity with Vatican II, and then everything that comes out of Vatican II, and all the renewal within the global Catholic Church. And within Protestantism, all the Protestant communities in Latin America that have been there for 150 years and could not really take off. But in the 60s, Pentecostal Protestantism takes off throughout Latin America, throughout Asia, throughout Africa. So you have here in the three Christian traditions. The global age has been an age of, again, new forms of fraternization that transcend nations, races, languages, cultures, etc. So yes, in this respect, maybe Christianity in Europe is somewhat old, but it's very fresh and new throughout much of Latin America, Africa, and Asia, I would say.
But this aspect of Christianity being a forerunner of modernity in its implied sociology, don't you think that it had been neglected by science and bibliography?
Yeah, sure. It has been neglected, not fully. You have a lot of theories. I mean, I mentioned Tocqueville, obviously. For him, it was very clear, but you have a lot of thinkers. But yes, there is a form of secularism that comes out of the Enlightenment critique of religion that indeed doesn't want to recognize its own roots in Christianity. So the Enlightenment that doesn't want to realize how much it is a form of secularized Christianity, then of course, then it doesn't want to deny precisely because it wants to present itself as completely new. So the problem with modernity is because it claims to be a radical break with the past. It has to have a myth of its own origins as something totally radically new, and doesn't want to recognize precisely that there was already a lot of good things in history before. Not everything begins with modernity.
The dynamics of adolescence and parents.
Right. There's time for just one last question. No questions? Okay, then we can stop here. I would like to warmly thank Professor Casanova for his provocative, for his very insightful speech. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tomorrow, according to our timetable program, we should start at 9:30, meaning that the bus will be, sorry? Sorry, excuse me. Sorry. So again, now the micro is switched on, so let me to warmly thank Professor Casanova for his insightful and provocative speech. And to remind that tomorrow morning we should start at 9:30 with two very interesting papers, one by Professor Christos Karakoulis from the University of Athens, of Shepherds and Sheep, Leadership, Individuality, and Togetherness according to the Four Gospels imagery. And the second one from Professor Ekaterini Tsalaboni from the University of Thessaloniki, on the marginal impact of biblical studies in contemporary Greek Orthodox theology and why it matters for the discussion of individual and community. So we will start at 9:30, meaning that your bus will be waiting for you in Xenia Hotel at 8:45. So please be there at 8:45 because the whole day we have a full program for the whole day, so we should not be late for the beginning of our conference tomorrow morning. So thank you very much for, I think we had a good start for our conference. Thank you very much to all of you. And now it is time for dinner. So thank you very much.